Yeah, and one very gaping hole, I might say, about what I see in guitar method literature in general, is that at the beginning at least, or maybe quite long into the methods, no one really deals with the idea of phrasing, which is very important for expression.
Well, for mic expression,
yes,
certainly it's fundamental to
yes.
mainstream instrumental
Yes.
criteria.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. And that's something which you deal with very early on.
Yeah.
In
Obsessively.
your method. Yes, obsessively is a good word.
What else is there?
Your method is a lot about expression and making that possible, accessible for a child even.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something which is very interesting and different. So I was hoping you could tell us more about your thoughts and what you had in mind when you came up with this approach.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we should just say, that the preponderant direction for playing today in the guitar community regarding the wrist is the idea that the wrist is rather firm and rather static.
Straight, almost.
Well, I mean, you have every possible incremental idea about that. Some will religiously say that I wouldn't dream of holding it straight. But that's not really the point. I think the point here is that any degree of tension in the wrist is a form of bias.
Yeah.
So therefore, if I want to begin on a level playing field, square one, and I don't want to have to induce strength merely to hold my hand up, that the fundamental proposition is going to be to start with it relaxed.
And straight away you get this hand position.
Yeah.
Just by relaxing. Yes.
Well, there's arch.
Yeah.
There's rotation.
Yeah, but that's a
there's
natural
curve.
That's a very natural position.
Well, I don't agree that it's natural. What I'm saying is that by manipulating arch, rotation, and curve, you can come up with an infinitude of possibilities.
Yes.
So I'm choosing the possibility which enables me to have the all-purpose right-hand position, namely the idea that I can have equal power in the thumb and fingers, right?
Yes.
It's a very careful choice that I'm making, but this allows me to start without bias in the right hand, see, so that any strength, any power that I employ whatsoever is directed ultimately to mic expression. I don't have any input simply to hold my hand up.
Yep.
Now, for some people, this doesn't seem to matter. It doesn't seem to be a predominant consideration at all. They're perfectly happy to sit and, because they can play fast, and I mean, all power to them for being able to play fast. That's an accomplishment. Okay, so that would be the first thing, right? Now, getting back to the idea of phrasing. All right, we have to build the phrasing on top of physics that will enable us to phrase, which is why I don't want bias in my hand to start with, right?
Yep.
All right, so now, secondly, I have to consider the types of phrasing. And the first type of phrasing that I think we should talk about is what I call the short phrase, and what violinists and flautists call the slur.
Okay.
Now, I can't use that word for guitar because, as we know, the slur.
Guitarists know the slur as something else.
Right.
Yes.
See, the fundamental difference between this on guitar and what a violinist or a flautist would do is that there is no rhetorical connotation to this. This is simply a mechanical activity.
Yes.
And if you ask guitarists to prioritize their slur, they will say, well, of course I want both the notes to sound as uniform and as equal as possible. And all hats off again to that. That's very important, and especially if you're talking about doing it with your fourth finger, it takes a long time to develop that.
Yep.
So that is what I call the uniform or mechanical slur.
Okay.
All right. Now the second type of slur is what I call the short phrase slur. And that is the one where we incorporate a rhetorical element. So that, for instance, those have an expression
Yes.
which is inextricably bound up with the nature of the slur, which is that it be played strong to weak. Now, there's nothing conjectural on the mic side about this. They all know that slurs have a rhetorical component. It's only on guitar that it's strictly a mechanical operation.
So you mean for other mainstream instrumentalists, it's not a question at all?
Yeah, no, not at all.
Okay.
And shall we just say for mainstream instruments? I don't know if this quite qualifies as a mainstream instrument.
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah, right. Okay, so what I've had to do is I bring in what I call the short phrase. Now, there's two things that it enables me to do. Number one is we incorporate the slur rhetoric into the guitar. And we discount the necessity to use the left hand. So that what I'm doing here is I'm introducing what I call a short phrase within the context of strong to weak.
Strong to weak.
And we must damp the last note either through staccato or by playing a rest, and we must join the two notes smoothly.
Legato.
So, right, and so if I ask any violinist or cellist or bassoonist or what that is, they'll say, "Oh, that's a slur." Just remember, I can't call it that on the guitar. Okay,
Yes.
so short phrase. Now let's just have a little example here where we'll show what the short phrase can do. If I play metrically, now is that with the short phrase? No, that is just the normal metric application. Whereas if I play with the short phrase, listen to the last two notes. Surprise accent.
Yeah.
Oh, goody.
You weren't expecting
Right,
that note
right.
to be that loud.
Right.
Yeah.
You see, because this way, in the normal playing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas short phrase, we rearrange the accents and we come up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So much more expressive.
Well, it's a whole separate option, isn't it? It's like the Joker, the wild card in the pack that can impersonate different qualities,
Yes.
right? So something new. Now, if I apply this to the thumb technique, right, and this is obviously not a rank beginner's piece, but they would have been playing maybe 6 months, or in the case of a slow student, perhaps even a year.
Wow. Okay. So you're still using the short phrase, but this is a more difficult piece, as you say. Yeah, it's a lot more, interesting than the first one because it's more difficult. But I can see the application of the short phrase
Of
as
the
well.
short
there.
phrase,
Yes.
right. And did you notice what occurs at the end?
Ah, yes,
Which brings us to our next topic,
yes.
the long phrase.
And all this is being made possible because you have already established or taught the necessary physics to
Exactly.
achieve all this.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, regarding the short phrase, that is arm, and then just thumb. Now, we haven't talked about the damping, and I don't think we'll get into that too much today, but obviously the production of silence
Okay.
is something where we could do a whole raft of segments.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
just that it's not very romantic to talk about it, because who says, I just want to learn to play silence?
Yeah, but silence is part of music.
It
Yeah,
is
it's
the
just that-
shaping force.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, we better not get too much into that. Okay, now let's talk about a different world. The world of the long phrase and the world of crescendo diminuendo. Now, here we're dealing with constant but incremental change. Okay? I spent so long learning to go pumping those metric accents out, and now you tell me I can't play a metric accent anymore? Now you tell me I have to play the softest note at the beginning? Wow. Yes. Constant but incremental change. So I have to test what is my softest note. Barely audible. That's about the only time that it's permissible to play a barely audible note, because we like to wonder what's out there, and then it's going to gradually come like an express train.
Yes.
Hit us in the face. Okay, fine. So that is thumb only.
Okay.
Now, my loudest note, which of course must still be a beautiful note, like all other notes, will have thumb plus arm power, right? So that's my loudest note. Okay, now I've got 8 notes in between, so I've got a fair bit of change coming up. Right, and going down.
Gradual change.
Right, constant but gradual change.
So that's crescendo, diminuendo.
Diminuendo, right. Now, if I take this in the context of the long phrase is virtually the same thing. It's the same physics.
Yes,
but
same physics.
In terms of the effect, it's singing, it's possibly less intrusive. You know, crescendo, diminuendo, I tend to want to something dramatic.
Always earth-shattering.
Exactly, insofar as we can do that on the guitar.
Yes.
And then for a long phrase, it can be barely noticeable. You see? So an example of that might be something like this. Now, I should explain that the first note of each bar is not in the long phrase.
Okay.
That is a note that we call tenuto.
Right.
So the idea here is that we start out with a note that is a little bit longer and a little bit stronger than what is normally written, followed by the long phrase.
The long phrase.
Right. Okay. So.
Subtly altering the tempo as you go
along with the long phrase. Yes. Exactly.
That's part of it as well, isn't
Jerry,
it?
you don't talk like a commercial guitar teacher.
Well, I think it's because I'm spending a bit of time with you.
It's rubbing off. You're talking like a mic musician already. Okay, so the point here, which you bring up that is so terribly, terribly important, is that the body language works in the long phrase. And that we have a target area in the middle of the long phrase,
yes.
And we move towards that, so we could say that we nudge it this way, and then we surrender towards the end of the long phrase. So that's a whole other world of playing, right? And if we want to apply that at the other end of the spectrum in a repertoire situation. Just keeps going forever and ever. There will never be a piece that we will look at that won't have some sort of phrasing applications to them.
I can see why.
A rich world on the guitar.
It's waiting to be discovered.
Exactly. Well, waiting to I think always to be refined further. You know that there's no end to that. Great things have happened with the guitar since I started out. For instance, in the 50s, but I don't see any foreseeable end to this development. Mainly because as a mic instrument, we still are only knee high to what the great violinists and pianists and so on.
But I must add that your life's work, your creation of this method is a huge step in that direction.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you.